Story 1. I know a man who was rather obese. He started a weightlifting and weight loss regimen and got himself fit. He did not do it for his health. He did it because he wanted to go to a comic convention dressed as He-Man wearing only a small fur loincloth. Story 2. I once had a guy at GameStop correct me on how to properly pronounce Drizzt in the Drow language. He even snort-laughed when I said it wrong. If you know who Drizzt is, then this story needs no further explanation. Story 3. When I arrived at a new school for 6th grade in 1980, I was asked to share my hobby with the class as an icebreaker. I collect Star Wars memorabilia, was my cheerful reply. I was later voted most unique by the class. I do not think they meant it as a compliment. I deserved it, I guess. Story 4. I was at the Star Trek-themed hotel in Las Vegas the last weekend it was open before they changed themes. I was sitting at Quark's bar, drunkenly commiserating about it with some other Star Trek fans. We were very sad that it was closing. One guy mused, "Do you think they will build another one?" I replied, "Well, there was an NCC 1701B. Story 5. So recently on holiday, I explained the details of aircraft landing procedures in response to people asking if we could expect airliners landing on a nearby runway. I was surprised that people did not know aircraft always land against the wind. So the nerd was me. Story 6. It was me and a friend. Back when my town first got cable internet, we only had digital subscriber line before that. One of my best friends was one of the first people to sign up. When they hooked it up, he called me about 5 minutes later and said, "Dude, they just connected my internet. I'm coming to get you right now. You have to see this." We went to his house and watched excitedly as he downloaded a large file very quickly. I think we probably even yelled. I still get excited about internet speed. I had to go to the doctor the other day, and I hit over 500 megabits per second on 5th generation wireless. I took a screenshot. Story 7. In the campus cafeteria, I saw a man eating breakfast while watching something on his laptop with wired earbuds on. He then unplugged the earbuds from the laptop, folded it up, neatly put it in his bag, pulled out a tablet, plugged the earbuds into it, stood up, went and refilled his cup of orange juice while watching the tablet, came back to his table, unplugged the earbuds again, packed up the tablet, pulled the laptop back out, plugged the earbuds back in, and kept watching on it while finishing breakfast. Story 8. Not seen, but I remember hearing a nerdy teenager explain an exaggerated facial expression commonly used in Japanese manga to his mom at the mall. I cringed so hard. Story 9. My dad borrowed his friend's stormtrooper cosplay so he could march with my mom through the house, calling her and saying, "Click yes, Lord Vader. Click." Story 10. My audiophile friend knows every album in his collection by catalog number. Say, "I want Tatsuro Yamashita's for you." He has 2 versions, LP and CD, in his collection. He won't refer to either of them as for you LP or for you CD. He'll refer to them as either RAL 8801 or RACD4. One time I went to his house and he asked me, "Yo, my FLT 025 I ordered a while back has arrived. Let's give it a spin." Who refers to Nonagon Infinity as FLT 025. Story 11. I remember when I was in high school, someone asked if anyone had a Linux Live CD on hand. I was not exactly sure why anymore, but I said something like, "Hold on." I fished my CD case out of my backpack and asked him which distribution he would like. I think he chose Ubuntu. Story 12. I have seen people do the Naruto run to get to class in college while wearing a Naruto headband. Story 13. I once saw a man in a full-length black leather trench coat, military boots, and sunglasses, running through the city during the day as if it were completely normal. Story 14. Unironically reading a dictionary to pass the time. Also skipped classes just to read more books in the library. Story 15. It was the early 1990s, and I was working at a place that sold software and personal computers. We had an opening for an entry-level personal computer technician. The young man who applied looked like an engineer from the 1950s. He wore a short-sleeve white dress shirt, a clip-on tie, a pocket protector, and what we called birth control glasses in the military. He had just graduated with an engineering degree, and his dream job was to work on the Earth to Mars communication system. I walked him to the door after the interview and saw what had to be his father and brother, both dressed identically to the applicant. Story 16. When I was in school, there was a whole table of kids, who were probably all really rich now, who just sat and did Rubik's Cubes at lunch. They had lots of oily, matted hair and body odor. But I think they were so nerdy that everybody just left them alone. Story 17. Art College. We did not have a sports team, we had live-action role players. The first time I saw medieval cosplay was while I was busy not sleeping, getting projects done, and working. A group of students would be out on the quad for months attacking one another as if they were training to lay siege to something. There were call-outs and a hierarchy ranking system from what I could gather across dorm viewpoints. I do not know how these students had time to make their gear and be out on the quad during all seasons. We had relentless deadlines. I know for a fact that off the quad, some Game of Thrones drama was occurring behind the scenes. Story 18. I had a roommate who replaced the calendar in Windows on his computer with a Middle-earth calendar. I forget which one, the Shire one maybe. He wrote the plugin to do it himself from scratch. Story 19. Met a man in a gift shop who worked at a movie theater in the early 2000s. He said he would get very bored during his shifts at the theater, so he memorized the entire alphabet in Elvish. When children who were fans of Lord of the Rings came into the gift shop, he would write out their names for them in Elvish. Story 20. One of my friends talked for almost 40 minutes about war strategies and technology because I asked something about my computer. It was really cute and I understood some words. Story 21. High school gifted classroom discussing how fast movement would have to be in High School of the Dead to move around a bullet. Story 22. Booting a Prime computer in 1980 involved entering the bootstrap program instructions in binary via the front panel switches. If I recall correctly, I learned from him how to do it. Story 23. A coworker's son locked himself in an office by playing with the door knob. We were all trying to figure out how to open the door when one person pulled out a plastic card and unlocked it on the first try. He shouted, "First try, natural 20 on my sleight of hand." I was the only one who knew what he was talking about. Story 24. I stayed in a psychiatric ward once, and one man was going so crazy from boredom that he decided to build his own Warhammer 40,000 game out of paper. He spent a lot of time making the board in pieces and taught me how to play, but I wasn't really interested. He got another man to join him, and they played a lot over the next few days. From a distance, it just looked like two men moving pieces of paper around on a table, but they seemed to really enjoy it. It was pretty wholesome, but also really nerdy. Story 25. He made a do-it-yourself infrared receiver so that he could use his monitor and PlayStation Portable as a sword, then slash enemies in a game that he also created for the PlayStation Portable. This was around 2009. Story 26. In sixth form, we had a relaxed dress code. Most people still dressed relatively smartly, but there was no requirement to do so. One student in our year pushed the limits by turning up in various cosplays on different days, including a full Attack on Titan cosplay, cape and all. He was also the type to bring his gaming laptop and spend his lunch playing games rather than socializing. Story 27. I was at a bookstore where people were playing Warhammer. Two guys got into an argument about the lore and pieces and why they can't work together. I stayed for about 20 minutes because their argument was pretty interesting. Also, the miniature armies looked impressive. Story 28. In a Friday morning lecture, someone casually showed up with a two-handed sword slung on his back. Story 29. Not as bad as some here, but I went to a friend's housewarming party and was drinking with our group in his kitchen when he realized the other group he knew hadn't been seen for about half an hour. He went into his living room and it turned out that, without knowledge or coordination, two separate people had arrived at the party with their full deck of Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards and were having a battle. This was around 2008, and we were all 18 or 19, so legally allowed to drink in Scotland with no older adult supervision. We left them to it and retreated to the kitchen where we made Angel Delight with Jim Beam instead. Story 30. I used to go to General Convention in the 1980s. I have seen more nerdy behavior than I can ever explain. It is like trying to tell people about my experiences in the war. I will not bother telling stories because no one would believe me. Story 31. I remember in high school 2 of my friends competing to see who could name more capital cities in the world. We would call out country names from an atlas, and the first to answer earned a point. They were both incredibly intelligent guys, and I am not gonna lie, it was really fun. Story 32. One of the men in my bondages and discipline, dominance and submission group made his submissive wear a 20-sided die as a necklace. Whenever she earned a punishment, she had to roll it to determine her penalty. Story 33. I saw a man ask another man if he wanted a snack. Story 34. Back when the Numa Numa video was first making the rounds on the internet, there was a girl in my high school who was really into Romanian pop music. Anytime someone mentioned Numa Numa, she would slide into the conversation like, actually, that song is called Name of Song. And do you know what the lyrics are about? Then she would usually sing part of the song. I hate to admit it, but I don't think anyone else cared. We all just wanted to say, wow, haha. Crazy video, so funny. She was sincerely trying to educate us. Story 35. As someone who has both a computer science degree and a cybersecurity degree, you need to be more specific. I have worked with people who not only live in their mother's basement but have practically turned it into their own personal data center. Story 36. I regularly read congressional bills and the tax code, not professionally, just for fun. Closest thing I have. Story 37. Probably reading this thread and thinking, that sounds like a lot of fun, and wishing I had done some of these activities when I was in school over 20 years ago. Story 38. I have several visible anime tattoos, wear a custom jacket with an anime symbol on it, and I am a proud degenerate weeb. I have met a girl in school who unironically said baka to me. I cringed so hard. Story 39. I did 2 summer internships at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration years ago. At a party, I watched 2 intoxicated physics majors get into a passionate argument about the merits of string theory. After receiving an email notifying everyone that we had been added to the summer social email list, I sent a reply all message asking to also be added to the summer social email list, so I could be notified about activities like solitaire games, solo meditation, and single-player game LAN parties. I made a lot of friends. Story 40. A girl was showing her assignment in which she got an A+ in subject A to all the teachers in the other 5 subjects. We were well into our 20s. Story 41. I had a person describe to me the entire Fast and Furious franchise scene by scene in a single sitting during a field operation. It was better than watching the movies. Story 42. That would be me. I study Latin, so my uncle got me a copy of The Hobbit in Latin for Christmas. I opened it, read the map inside, and said, wow, all the runes are in Latin too. Story 43. I have been told that it is me. I work in warehousing, data, and design. For fun and because it is cool, I designed an inventory system for the food storage in our basement. We have barcode scanners and we scan the food we buy into the storage room. When we bring it up to the kitchen to use, we scan it out. I have had training sessions with my teenage children on how to use the system properly. We do cycle counts occasionally. A to-buy report is available for grocery shopping. We have minimum inventory amounts that trigger inclusion on the report. One of my daughters said, no one else I know has to be trained to use their basement. Story 44. I am probably the nerdiest person I know in real life. At the request of a friend, I once calculated a very rough estimate of how many people it would take to blow out the sun. Story 45. I must say I have not seen that many nerdy things. It is either that or I am so nerdy that a lot of nerdy things are just regular things to me. However, I think I will give a special mention to a person who had a Lamborghini entirely covered in Dragon Ball stickers, back when watching anime was not cool. Story 46. Live action role-playing in the park. We got intoxicated and watched, and one of our friends joined in. It was an enjoyable time. Story 47. Travel days involve wearing steel and leather armor and hitting each other with sticks. Story 48. One time, I was hanging out with a group of book lovers. They were discussing which books would suit a mainstream audience for about an hour for their book club. I couldn't understand most of what they were saying. Story 49. It was me. I was single and just out of college. living on my own in an apartment. I saw a really cute girl at the pool reading a physics book. When she got up to leave, I took my chance and said I noticed she was reading a physics book and that I still have my books from college, so if she ever wanted to come to my apartment to check them out, she could. She quickly shot me down and probably told all her friends about the son of Ted Bundy in apartment 101. Story 50. I probably can't remember half of them from school, but we had some very outgoing nerds. The funniest to me was an old friend. I came over and went into his room to see what he was doing. He was 8 inches from the TV playing a dragon game, and his girlfriend was on his bed not wearing much. She looked at me and said, "Can you believe he would rather do that than be with me right now?" He was so focused and yelling at his teammates he didn't even hear it. They stayed together for a long time, but not surprisingly, she ended it recently because he spends all his time playing games. Story 51. Not one thing, it is my husband. If I say something to eat looks interesting, he makes it. He finds a recipe and produces fine dining quality food. He is not a cook. He is a scientist. Watching him convert recipes to use all the technical gadgets in the kitchen is like magic. He also sets the lights in my bedroom to match any location in the world I ask. Story 52. I used to run a trading card game shop, so I have seen many enthusiasts doing and saying nerdy things. My personal favorite was the 2 guys we called the Yu-Gi-Oh guys. We had free-use gaming tables, so there were always people playing various games in the shop. One day, these 2 guys came in and sat down for a game of Yu-Gi-Oh. What followed was an hour and a half of them loudly announcing their attacks, pointing at each other, standing up and yelling, and flipping their cards over with 2 fingers like they were in the anime. It was the greatest thing I have ever seen, and those guys came back almost every day for the entire 4 years I ran that place. If I could be as enthusiastic about anything as those 2 were about their card game, I would be very powerful. Story 53. I know a man from school who legally changed his name to Sasuke. It is very unusual in rural England. Story 54. Are we supposed to keep score? 1 point for each thing we have done. Story 55. I passed General Certificate of Secondary Education Astronomy in 2009 and completed my marked coursework on a 1982 8-bit microcomputer. I used a 1979 scientific calculator that required 4 AA batteries and had a light in the lessons. The younger students all gathered around to look at it. Story 56. It's me, and I am currently in the process of doing it. I am on my 5th rewatch of Star Trek, the original series. I have created a spreadsheet that I keep with me while I watch. I am documenting things like, does Captain Kirk wear the yellow shirt? The green one? Does he go shirtless? Does he rip his shirt? Does Spock show emotion? Does Dr. McCoy say, "Damn it"? Or he is dead? Does anyone fall in love? And if so, who? Does Spock perform the nerve pinch? The mind meld? Basically, I am tracking tropes. And I am loving it. Story 57. I transferred a file over the phone with no modem involved. It was not a large file, just 100 or 2 bytes. I read out the hexadecimal pairs 1 byte at a time. It worked. I do not remember why I did it, though. I think there was a real reason, not just to see if I could. Story 58. At a GameStop, someone made fun of my friend for buying a Star Wars video game while he was buying the newest Cabela's Deer Hunter. Come on, man. Story 59. In the 1980s, I earned my computer merit badge in Boy Scouts by programming a Dungeons and Dragons character sheet generator. I know it is supposed to be someone else, but I am proud of my nerd trifecta. Story 60. Origins Convention, about 1996. Vampire live-action role-playing was huge, and all the cool gamers were dressed in Gothic style and participating in the event spaces. Some of them became really annoying. There was one goth vampire, wearing shades, a leather trench coat, and Doc Martens, a decently sized guy. He kept walking right through people, making them move or get bumped, while doing the gesture for being invisible. I was walking with my friend from another game publisher. Friend was a very large goth man. He walked right into the vampire and knocked him down. "Hey man, what is going on?" Friend said, "Sorry man, didn't see you." The signal was hands up like Dracula pulling up his cloak. Story 61. Once in high school, I was about to fight another young man for reasons I do not fully recall, as it has been roughly 20 years. Most likely because I was kind of a mouthy jerk, not aggressive, just not as funny as I like to think I was. Anyway, we squared off in a small hallway near the cafeteria. He paused to offer me a warning and, without a trace of humor in his voice, said, "Before we begin, it's only right that I inform you that I've learned everything I know playing Mortal Kombat." It suddenly became very clear to me that my karma couldn't possibly recover from striking such a person. I thanked him for his time, apologized, and walked away laughing far harder than I should have. Story 62. In a high school macromedia class, we had to make a flash animation video to tell a fairy tale story, and it had to be at least 3 minutes long. One student made a 20-minute-long flash animation telling the story of Kingdom Hearts 1, then became very upset when no one really understood. A close runner-up moment was in a high school biology class, where someone asked the self-proclaimed smartest student in class if he could help them with an assignment. He turned to them and said, "I refuse to help you unless you can name all the captains of the Starship Enterprise." Story 63. Not the nerdiest, but there was this guy who was pretty weird. He used to carry a katana at school, wear a leather trench coat, and sometimes sunglasses. He would bring sake and drink it on the school grounds while everyone was playing soccer. I was another lesser nerd who enjoyed reading. We invited him to a party once, and he turned us down by asking if there was sake, as he only drank sake at parties. Story 64. In college at a football game, I saw a guy who looked like a stereotypical nerd, with his Texas Instruments 83 calculator out, furiously calculating as he watched the game. Story 65. Buying Doritos at a gas station while dressed like Scion Arc Vegeta. I guess they were on the way to a convention. Story 66. Pull out a fuel and distance log after refueling, record everything by hand, and reset 2 different odometers. I was not making fun of them, but their gas float worked. They were just taking care of their vehicle, though it was a little nerdy. Story 67. I was servicing a GameStop on a weekday morning. The only people in there were 2 teenage boys who were painting some models on a table set up like a battle of monsters or something. Maybe World of Warcraft. They were being watched over by the manager, who was a dead ringer for comic book guy. I was doing my thing in the back when I heard the door chime. I looked over and a third kid came in with the biggest smile on his face, proudly proclaiming that his orcs had just come in. The manager crossed his arms and looked sternly at the kid, asking, "Now, is that orcs with a C or a K?" The kid's smile grew even wider as he shouted proudly, "With a K." All 4 of them broke into gleeful laughter. Couldn't help but laugh too. I have no idea what the difference is, but they were just so happy. I went back to my truck and called my boss to tell her, and we both laughed at them. Kind of cruel for sure, but at that level of enthusiasm, come on. Story 68. I used to work with a guy who had a black book of breeding Pokemon and the statistics which he knew by heart. He learned it all from Smogon. Story 69. I always thought I was a nerd, but after reading many of these, I do not think I am that nerdy. Story 70. Self-nomination. Once upon a time, in my job as a Museum of Art security guard, I learned all the blind spots in the security system so that I could read books while on the job. Story 71. Fair warning, it is kind of gross and makes me want to vomit thinking about it. When I was playing rugby league, we had a guy on the team who was a pretty typical nerdy person. Into obscure anime and manga, excellent grades, engineering student, and was an absolute unit. He played rugby because the sheer size of the man was such an advantage. It would take a minimum of 2 players to tackle him. Anyway, at training one day he had a bit of a cold. He sneezed and his nose expelled its contents. Instead of using a tissue or even wiping it with his hands, he made the loudest slurping noise imaginable, slurped it down, and kept training. It still haunts me 18 years later. Story 72. Little sad but nerd to the end. I worked with my friend for years doing computer repair and on-site service work. He got sick and I was with him at the end in the hospital. He was out of it and could barely see because he had no contact lenses. Suddenly, he got up, went to the morphine machine, and started adjusting the controls. Even though they were locked out, he stepped back to evaluate it, leaned in to turn more dials and seemed satisfied. Then he lay back down. I'm pretty sure my friend was doing a cathode ray tube convergence adjustment from the 1990s to get that LCD screen in focus. That's nerd to the very end. Story 73. This might be more proof of age than expertise, but I was the only student in my dormitory with a computer. Story 74. A friend holds the record for a game at an arcade bar. Took him hours to achieve it. Story 75. My entire life. I am one bad day away from going full on, actually on someone's case. Story 76. I went to school with a guy who was nerdy in a mad scientist and engineer kind of way. He always had his backpack full of tools and other useful items, such as desoldering wick. One day, I do not remember why, I asked him if he happened to have a pair of pliers with him. What kind do you need? He asked, because of course he had more than one type with him. Story 77. A guy I met on World of Warcraft came to visit me. When he needed to get a refill on coffee, he kissed me on the cheek and said, "Be right back," simultaneously nerdy and adorable. Story 78. On a bus ride after school, I listened to a friend explain the lore of 2 video games he plays in detail. They were interesting and I thought they were cool, but it was a 40-minute bus ride and I had a long day. I spoke maybe 5 sentences the entire time. He showed me pictures of characters and videos of the games while I had a headache and felt slightly motion sick. Story 79. My partner installed a realistic science and mathematics modification into his personal computer game, and then filled about 3 notebooks in a week with calculations on how to succeed in his video game missions. Story 80. This was me. They asked a simple question. What defines and makes a rock a rock? I proceeded to write a 300-word essay defining what makes a rock a rock. I do not know. I guess I just like to write essays for answers. Story 81. Rain was pouring down. I came out of the subway and saw a man performing hand signs from the Naruto series as he walked into the rain. Story 82. My friends and I, age 25 and over, are going to conventions and cosplaying as our favorite anime characters. Story 83. I saw a man get a kindori tattoo. I see him every day in the mirror. Story 84. I have been to an outdoor wizard lamp in a public park. The only reason it was not the nerdiest thing I have ever seen was that there were no mirrors present. Story 85. My dad read an entire science textbook when I was in 7th grade, all before Thanksgiving dinner. Story 86. I just attended a wedding with terrible Game of Thrones-inspired wedding vows. Like the great houses of Westeros, these two will be united. Something about a dragon and winter. It was horrible and I am a Game of Thrones fan. Story 87. My friend just solved my differential equation assignment. Story 88. I have seen someone travel to another country just to watch a movie about a series that they really like. Story 89. My brother and I were crying because he reached Mewtwo in Pokemon Fire Red. Story 90. A friend and my boyfriend were talking about which Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards they would still need for their cube, reciting them from memory while walking up Mount High in Kyoto. Story 91. More like what I did. I made a spreadsheet of legendary guns based on a game once. Story 92. Once, while playing Dungeons and Dragons and waiting for my turn, I opened Shattered Pixel Dungeon on my phone and started playing it. How is that? Story 93. Like coding marathons that last for days or the dedication of gamers mastering every single move in a fighting game. It is quite fascinating to witness the passion and skill that people put into their hobbies and interests. Story 94. I joined the Doctor Who Society at my university. In the first week, there was a quiz with one simple goal. Name every Doctor Who episode. I got the highest score. Story 95. My husband is into Star Trek, and his best friend since college is into Star Wars. Every so often, they get into deep debates over which is better. When they pull out pen and paper to draw it out and explain their points, I take a double shot of whatever I am drinking and walk away. I have gone to pick up their drunken selves from the brewery a couple of times, and they start blasting Taylor Swift at the loudest volume. They now call a ride service. They are always asking me my opinion, and my answer is Garfield. What's even funnier is their nerdiness knows no limit. They will ask and present their points to whoever is around, like nerd recruitment or something. Story 96. I once saw someone pull out a full Dungeons and Dragons set during a family gathering just to explain the alignment chart to a confused relative. They had the dice, the character sheets, and an entire backstory for a hypothetical campaign. It was like watching a masterclass in nerd culture, complete with dramatic reenactments. The look on their relative's face was priceless, as if they were trying to decode an ancient language while surrounded by a bunch of elves. That moment was a beautiful reminder that nerdiness is just passion with a sprinkle of chaos. Story 97. Explain to a table of bored relatives why phylogeny is community-based. It's me, I'm the nerd. Story 98. I saw a video of a drunk man running from a police arrest. He ran around saying, "You can't see me. I have the cloak of invisibility." It was the funniest thing I have seen. And yes, he was caught. Story 99. Working as IT support for the Ministry of Defense in the United Kingdom, 3 of us used to play multiplayer Quake over our own private network at lunchtimes. Our counterparts at other sites, including the network manager, found out. Over the following weeks, the number of players increased to about 200, with a dedicated Quake server and a significant network load at lunchtimes. This was used as a benchmark traffic snapshot to justify a network speed upgrade. Essentially, we got the United Kingdom government to pay for our games to be faster. Story 100. Connecting to a 2400 baud modem by bit-banging into the telephone line. Story 101. Half-ass calf spring hop, on tiptoes 3 times forward on a dock to throw a rock the furthest. We were 30. Remember the mixed martial arts fighter who tucked and rolled a couple times for an evasive maneuver? It had that same energy. Story 102. I used to work at a call center. There was a kid about 17 or 18 years old who was on the heavy side and really awkward. He was an alright kid into technology and gaming, but he was kind of weird about it. There was another guy, maybe a year or 2 older, who was unpleasant and used to pick on him. At one point, another coworker got tired of this and had enough of the bullying. He stood up, grabbed the older guy, wrapped his arms behind his back, and told the kid to take his shot. He was serious, giving the kid a chance to land a free punch. The kid then started moving his hands as if casting a spell, like his mage character in World of Warcraft, pretending to conjure and throw a fireball. He literally went through the motions of making and throwing an imaginary fireball. The coworker then let the older guy go and said, "I gave you your chance. You're on your own." Story 103. I knew someone who went to Vistaprint and ordered a bunch of literal nerd cards. They handed them out to all of their friends so they could take them away for the rest of the day when they were not being nerdy enough. Story 104. I was a senior in high school, and some classmates were in the library discussing which Star Trek uniform was the best. I had to get involved and tell them that the movie uniforms from Star Trek 2 to 6 were the best. Story 105. I knew a man in college who bought a new laptop in 2008 and used only a console-based Linux operating system on it. There was no graphical user interface, only the command prompt. I understood using the command line for programming coursework, but he used it for checking email, web browsing, and everything else he did with the computer in 2008. Story 106. Carry around Dungeons and Dragons books everywhere. That happens to be my boyfriend. Story 107. I used to have hump day movie nights long ago. I was very enthusiastic about it. I would buy the DVD on Tuesday, rip it that night, and prepare my own themed trailers, basically early internet videos tracked down and ready to burn. I set it to burn overnight because you had to burn at speed 1 in those early days, especially with cheap discs. That way, if there was a failure, I had a second chance to start a burn before work. I fully committed to the BMW films, for instance. I edited my own narrative cut. I believe that was paired with Ronin or The Italian Job. Story 108. There was a prosecutor whose trial attire included a certain pin from a game series instead of an American flag or another typical lapel pin. After one verdict was announced, a juror asked him if the pin was some kind of flower. He denied it, and the juror laughed, saying that a real prosecutor would keep it in his pocket. From the Ace Attorney series, each side has a respective badge, and none of the prosecutors wear theirs proudly. Yes, it was custom-made and jewelry quality, not some cheap plastic. It had a ruby, pieces of pearl for the petals, and more. The irony is that in the first case he lost as he grabbed his bag, the pin was pulled and broke the part holding it together. Yes, that prosecutor was me. Story 109. A mathematician friend invited me to spend a few days at the beach with her and her friends to celebrate her birthday. We spent the first night playing Star Trek Caton until 3 a.m. in a Mexican tourist beach town. Story 110. At the wedding of one of my college roommates, during the ceremony, they played 2 songs from television shows. The theme to The Greatest American Hero and I'm Under Your Spell from the musical episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It made me teary-eyed. Story 111. I once saw an argument nearly come to blows over Star Trek versus Star Wars. Story 112. I saw 2 guys have an anime-style fight at the bus stop in high school. They were talking like it was anime too. Or maybe when a classmate was changing over his Yu-Gi-Oh card protectors in class in high school. I went to a specialist science and mathematics high school, if that explains it. Story 113. A man applied for work at my father's sporting goods shop and stated on his application that he spoke English and Klingon. I do not know if he ever used his Klingon at work, but my father was so amused by it and the rest of the resume was outstanding that he hired him for a managerial role. Story 114. For a few weeks, it was the rage among some of the senior engineers at the startup laser company where I was working to wear pocket protectors. This was around 2013. Yes, I am aware that working as a research scientist at a startup laser company places me far along the nerd continuum. I have met a few people for whom my first thought was, what a dork. Inevitably, they were all either theoretical physicists or mathematicians. Story 115. I was pretty much the top nerd in high school, which is another way of saying I was the kid they all picked on. One day, while I was sitting on the bus, reading some textbook or another, one of the metal shop majors came up to harass me. He said, "Hey, Capital, got any transistors on you?" Har har har. Without saying a word, I reached into my coat pocket, pulled one out, and handed it to him. Then I went back to my book. It was just one of those random things that somehow finds its way into your pocket and you don't know what to do with it. Came in handy that day though. Story 116. I love trivia, so I participated in this one that was all French. I am English and I won. Story 117. Saw someone yesterday walking with the Apple Vision. I don't know, it's cool but very nerdy to run around in public with that device. Story 118. I was part of a Dungeons & Dragons group for a few years, and we had an annual all-day event since most of our birthdays are close together. We would gather for a full day, dressed in costume as our characters, play Dungeons & Dragons for about 14 hours straight, drink alcohol, and enjoy a medieval-style banquet. It was very nerdy, but I really missed that event. Story 119. Attempted to diagram the preamble to the Constitution from memory. Story 120. Our small office had a holiday party, and our nerdiest programmer offered the office secretary a ride home. They both went to his car, and he opened the passenger side door for her. He then walked to the driver's side door, which did not open, so he walked back to the passenger side and told the secretary he forgot the driver door did not open. He got in the passenger side and climbed over her to the driver's side. I would have given anything to see the expression on her face as he climbed over her. Story 121. A former boss spoke Klingon. It was how his team won tabletop gaming tournaments because no one knew what they were saying. Story 122. Sitting in a brew pub, reading a fantasy paperback. It was me. I was the nerd. My boss's girlfriend showed up with a friend with the idea of hooking us up. I was so into the book I pretty much ignored the girl. We have been together over 35 years now. I still tend to ignore her, but she understands. Blame it on my attention deficit disorder, baby. Story 123. This is what I did that was nerdy. When I met Josh Brolin, I kneeled before him and said, "Mighty Thanos, I can help you acquire the Infinity Stones if you spare me." Josh chuckled, took his hands to my shoulders, gently raised me up, and told me, "Your physique tells me you are strong and can help crush any resistance in the quest for the stones. You are now a child of Thanos." Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.